Assalamu alaikum students. Uh, the topic of sociolinguistics we are going to discuss today as language planning, and we are also going to discuss Pidgin and Creole. So I'm starting with language planning. In every country or in every province we have many languages. In multilingual countries we can see that there are many languages spoken, and even if there is only one language spoken, there are many dialects of that language. So government needs one language or one dialect of a language to use for official purposes. So what the government does is that it selects one of the dialects of a language and then standardizes it and then declares it as official language of that country. So now I would start reading from the first point. Government, legal and educational organizations in many countries have to plan which variety or varieties of the languages spoken in the country are to be used for official business. For example, in Israel, Hebrew has been chosen as the official government language, and in India the choice was Hindi, yet in many non-Hindi speaking regions there were riots against this decision. I will explain first and then I will move to the last point. So in the first point there are the same things that when government decides to choose one of the language dialects as an official language, it is called language planning, and that language or the particular dialect of that language is standardized. So in the second and the third points we can see the examples of Hebrew and Hindi to be chosen as the official languages. And in India it is said that in India there was opposition in many areas where Hindi was not the language of the people living there, so they were against Hindi language to be chosen as the official language. This is a political decision, as when we talked about that in the lesson of bilingualism and multilingualism, that when a country declares itself to be bilingual or multilingual or monolingual, all these things are decided on political basis. So to choose one of the languages or one of the language dialects as the official language or the standard language or the national language is also a political matter, which is not so easy to decide, because there is always opposition from people who are not in favor of that language, who want their own language to be prioritized. So that is the case in India. Here I will give you example of Pakistan as well. In Pakistan we have Urdu as our official and as our national language, and we have standardized it as well. So what is the process of standardization of language? We are going to discuss that in the coming slides or in the coming topic. So I am now reading the last bullet or the last point, that is, there were national language wars in the Philippines before different groups could agree on the name of the national language, Filipino. So as I was telling you before, that it's not very easy to decide that which language or which language dialect is going to be selected as the official or national language. In the same way, it's not even easy to decide the name of that language. Here we see the example of Philippines, that there were even sort of national language wars even to decide the name of the national language. So now we go towards the process of language planning. So there are 4 major steps. First step is selection of that language. The process of selection includes choosing an official language. So first of all, one of the language or the language dialect is chosen or is selected to be standardized, which is not very easy, which is actually the most difficult stage or the most difficult part of language planning. The second part is that when a language is selected, then what happens to that language, how that language is dealt. So I will read the point second, which is codification. The process of selection is followed by codification, in which basic grammars, dictionaries and written models are used to establish the standard variety. So what happens here is that the word codification means that the language is standardized, or the language is codified with the help of grammar. Its grammar is finalized, its dictionaries are published, and its written models are declared, which means that what sort of orthography or what sort of writing system will be used for this language. All these things are finalized in codification. Its grammar, its vocabulary with the help of dictionaries, and its writing system or the written models. The third step is, I'm going to read it first. The process of elaboration follows with the standard variety being developed for use in all aspects of social life, and the appearance of a body of literary work written in the standard. The process of elaboration means that the language which is the language dialect or the language variety which is codified is now encouraged to be used in all aspects of social life, and it is encouraged to be used for the literary work. Yes, the fourth point is the implementation of that language. The government attempts to encourage use of standard language. The government implements it in all departments, in all areas of life to be used. Then the final point is the problem of acceptance. I will read from here first. is the final stage. Acceptance is the final stage when a substantial majority of population have come to use the standard language and to think of it as the national language, playing a part in not only social but also national identity. So acceptance is like the first step was that it was very difficult to select one language from many languages in spite of the opposition of other people who are speaking different languages. The final step is also very difficult for government because its purpose is to make the people continue their acceptance to use that language or to accept that language as their national identity or to accept that language as their official language. So the first and the final steps are very difficult. So students, after finishing the point of language planning or the topic of language planning, which was about the planning of a language or the planning of languages in a country, that how one language is chosen as the national language or as the official language, and how the people are dealt and how this political decision is made. So now we come towards another interesting topic, which is Pidgin. Pidgin is actually a sort of contact language, or it is a sort of barter language which is used for business purposes. When the two business people or the two business persons are not sharing their language, they try to develop a pidgin. So I will start with reading the first point. A variety of a language described as a pidgin is often discussed as contact language that developed for some practical purposes, such a trading among groups of people who had a lot of contact but who did not know each other's languages. As such, it would have no native speakers. The origin of term pidgin is thought to be from a Chinese variant of the English word business. So when the people who are in contact with each other due to some business purpose, which is most of the time business or some other purpose, and they don't know each other's language, they develop a sort of pidgin. Pidgin takes some vocabulary items from one language and some vocabulary items from the other language, and then these two contents from both languages are combined to understand each other. As it is not a proper language, it doesn't have any native speakers because it is developed out of your need. Now I would read the second point. For example, in Papua New Guinea, with more than 800 different languages, a lot of official business is conducted in Tok Pigeon. So Tok Pigeon is a pidgin. This language is now used by over 1 million people, but it began many years earlier as a kind of important language called a pidgin. So this is an example of a pidgin which is used in New Guinea. And now I will go towards the characteristics of pigeons or English pigeons. There are several English pigeons still used today. They are characterized by an absence of any complex grammatical morphology and somewhat limited vocabulary. As now I am explaining this thing, as I explained to you earlier, that the pigeons only comprise of some vocabulary items because its purpose is just to understand each other. For example, if one person wants to sell some potatoes to another person who doesn't know his or her language, then he or she would say that potatoes 20 kg, $1,000. So this is not a sentence but just a sort of a try to deliver the message. So the same thing is written here, that pigeon lacks any sort of grammatical morphology, and it has limited vocabulary, and at the same time it lacks grammar. Second point is inflectional suffixes such as s, which is used to make plurals like bags from bag, or girls from girl, boys from boy, and the second s, which is used with apostrophe to show possessives, are required on noun in standard English but are rare in English pigeons. So such sort of things are not used in pigeons too. The ed suffix to show the past, which we use to show the past of standard English, is typically missing. So ed is also missing in pigeon. Functional morphemes often take the place of inflectional morphemes. So how this thing is compensated, how the presence of for example inflectional morphemes is compensated? It is compensated with the help of functional morphemes. So I will read it again. Functional morphemes often take the place of inflectional morphemes found in the source language. For example, instead of changing the form of you to your, as in the English phrase your book, English-based pigeons use a form like belong and change the word order to produce phrases book, belong, you. So instead of using your book, what is used in pigeon is book, belong, you. So there is no use of your book in pigeon, but the use is of book, belong, you. English pigeons actually mean those pigeons in which one of the language is English, or which base most of the time on English. These pigeons are called English-based pigeons. So now I will go to the last point. The syntax of pigeon can be quite unlike the languages from which terms were borrowed and modified. So as I have explained to you earlier, the languages on which it is based, its syntax is not like that, or it doesn't at all have any standard syntax. Yes, now we go to the next slide, which is about Creoles. So now we have finished the topic of pigeons, and we know that pigeons are contact languages which are not like the other languages. These languages are uh, not having any syntax. These languages are not having any grammar or a standard grammar. The purpose of these languages or the pigeons is just to convey your message, and these the pigeons don't have any native speakers. And now we move to Creoles. Before starting the points, I want to introduce something about Creoles. When the people who are using pigeons get settled in one of the areas, or they get settled to, I'm just giving you an example, that if a person is doing business, he is from for example, he's from Pakistan, you can say, and he is doing business with some people who are in China, and he contacts with those people in a pidgin which is made up of Urdu and Chinese, and then he moves to with his family to China to increase his business or to develop his business, and there he starts using pigeon. There he survives, or his family survives, with the help of the pigeon they have developed for business purposes. But if he lives there, or if he stays there for a long time, and he has some cares which who go to school and who interact with the society there, and although at home they speak their L1, but at schools and markets and for their social activities they use that pigeon. So what happens that when they are they get deep or deeper in society, then the language which is used for their education, which is used for their official for their social purposes, starts affecting their pigeon. And now that pigeon is uh, affected, or is sort of is dominated by the language which is dominant in society there. So this was a sort of summary of that one. Now the children who are born there, they will inherit that pigeon as one of their L1s, and now that pigeon, when it is inherited as one of their L1s, will get the status of a Creole. Now it is no more a pigeon but a Creole when it is inherited, or when it becomes one of the L1s of a child. So I now start reading the first point. When a pigeon develops beyond its role as a trade or contact language and becomes the first language, or L1, of a social community, it is described as Creole. Talk pigeon is now a Creole. Talk pigeon, about which we were talking previously, and we discussed that as a pigeon has developed now as, or is inherited, and now that has got the status of a Creole. Second point is, a Creole initially develops as the first language of children growing up in a pigeon using community, and becomes more complex as it serves more communicative purposes. Unlike pigeon, so now I'm explaining these lines which I have read, that pigeon, when starts serving the purpose of fulfilling more communicative purposes, means that it is not only the business now, but now it is serving the purpose of fulfilling all communicative functions for the children who have inherited this. So unlike pigeon, now I'm reading again, unlike pigeon, Creoles have large number of native speakers and are not restricted at all in their uses. So Creoles have become more like languages. The Creoles have native speakers, and does not these do not only perform the function of business, but are used in all sort of social activities in life. Here is example of a Creole. Haiti has a French Creole, and Jamaica and Sierra Leone have English Creoles, or English based Creoles, you can say. The separate vocabulary elements of a pidgin can become grammatical elements in a Creole. So there were scattered vocabulary items in pidgin. Now I am explaining the last point, which I have explained earlier as well, that pigeons only comprise of vocabulary items, or these are collection of vocabulary items which just help us to convey, or which just help the business people to convey their meaning. But when it is inherited as a Creole, Creole now develops its own grammar, its syntax, and it is with rules now. So Creole becomes more like languages because it has now a definite syntax and grammar. So here are some things about Creole again, which most of them we have talked about so far. So when pigeon, I'm now reading the first point. When pigeon is inherited as a mother tongue, it becomes Creole. Second, when a pidgin develops beyond its role as a trade language and becomes the first language of a social community, it is described as a Creole. Normally, Creoles coexist with the standard language that was pidginized. So here we can again recall the example of the person or the business person who went to China and started living there, and his children were speaking a sort of pidgin to interact with Chinese, and now the pidgin he was or his family was using has become Creole, and now they are living there under the effect of Chinese language from which that pidgin was developed. Pidgin is developed with the two languages. So one of the language was Chinese, from which the pidgin of that person was created. So now in that context we read the second point again. Normally Creoles coexist with the standard language that was pidginized, means Chinese and Urdu were pidginized into a new pidgin in our example. The last point I am reading now. New Creoles do not have an established library of written language, and so are often influenced by the standard, which is therefore they tend to change frequently and rapidly. So why they are influenced by the external standard language from which this Creole or the Pidgin was created? Because the Pidgin didn't have much vocabulary, because the Pidgin didn't have the syntax, because the Pidgin was not enough to fulfill the needs. So what happens that we see further what happens. But we have seen here that now there will be a tendency to change very rapidly. So the Creole or the Pidgin, originally the Pidgin, will now start changing it very rapidly. It will get more words, it will get syntax from the language, from the standard language it was Pidginized of. So the post-Creole continuum, development from a Pidgin to a Creole, is known as Creolization. So the process of the development or the inheritance of a Pidgin as a Creole is called the process of Creolization, or we can say that the development of a Creole is called from a Pidgin is Creolization. Often there is retreat. I am now reading the second point. Often there is retreat from the use of the Creole by those who have greater contact with the standard variety of a language. Education and greater social prestige are associated with the higher variety or the standard variety used as a model. Many speakers will tend to use fewer Creole forms and structures. This is known as the Creolization. So I would explain it in my own words, that the same thing, that when the Creole is affected by the standard language which is being spoken in the society, and it starts getting effects from that standard language, it accepts, or it welcomes vocabulary items from that language, or it welcomes its syntax, it adopts its grammar, and the Creole, the pure form of Creole is affected. This process, when the Creole is breaking, when the Creole is changing its form, is called the Creolization, which means that the Creole is now in the process of destruction. Now I'm reading the third point. It leads at one extreme to a variety that is closer to the external standard model, and leaves at the other extreme a basic variety with more local Creole features. The more basic variety is called the basilect, and the variety closer to the external model. External model is used for the standard language which is being spoken in the society, is called the acrolect. Between these two extremes may be range of slightly different varieties, some with many and some with fewer Creole features, known as mesolect. So what we see, that when a Creole is in the process of decreolization, or is being affected by the standard language being spoken in the society where the speakers of Creole are living. So what happens, that sometimes it takes a minor effect. The Creole is a little bit affected. That form of a Creole is called basilect. And if the Creole is highly affected by the language of that society, by that standard language, which is named as an external model here, then it is called an acrolect. When it has maximum effect of the standard language of that society, it will be acrolect, and when the Creole has the minimum effect from the language, it is called a basilect. And all the situations in which different sort of content, or the different types of, or not the type, but different quantity or different amount of effect is present, or is called, are called the mesolect. So on a continuum, the two extremes are basilect, where there is less minimum effect. There on the other side of the continuum, or the other end of the continuum are acrolects, or the acrolect which is with maximum effect of the language, and in between on the continuum we find many mesolects with different quantity or different amount of effect from the language which is the standard language, or which is being spoken in the society out of home. So the next point is range of varieties evolving after the Creole has been created is called the post-Creole continuum. So the continuum about which I was talking is called the post-Creole continuum, after the process of decreolization. So it will be post-Creole continuum. Thus, now I am reading the last point. Thus, in Jamaica, one speaker may say, fee me book that, which is a basilect, which means that it is not affected by the other language, not the other language, but the language of the society, the standard language. Another may put it as, is me book, which is a mesolect, the situation in between. Or yet another may choose, it's my book, which means that now it has got the maximum effect from the standard language, which is English here. So here an English based pidgin was almost converted into English. So these are three examples of basilect, mesolect and acrolect. So that was the end of the session. Thanks a lot, and here are the references, and I will again tell you, as I tell you at the end of each session, that you will be provided handouts or the book material for this, and that perhaps has already reached you. And in case of any queries or any problems, we can also talk in our Google class. So thanks for the moment. Allah Hafiz.